Some hateful ideological rhetoric that originates in the United States is now used to inspire terror worldwide. Unfortunately, in a time when decisive leadership is needed, the president's rhetoric fans the flames with language that, whether intentional or not, may motivate and embolden white supremacist movements. We only need to look at the perpetrators of violence and hate to see the impact this rhetoric has had.
If there has been one constructive thing to come out of the Trump era, it's the current focus on white supremacy as a national and global security threat, as racist violence from Kentucky to Christchurch, New Zealand, seems to have galvanized everyone but the Republican Party. And our commander-in-chief, who continues to deny the threat despite warnings from the highest level of law enforcement, recently downgrading the federal response to domestic terror while continuing to push for a racist border wall that would not have stopped a young woman from being run over and killed by neo-Nazis in Virginia in 2017. Those 12 Jewish worshipers from being shot to death by a racist in Pittsburgh last year. Or most recently, those 3 black churches in Louisiana that authorities suspect were burned down by the white son of a local sheriff's deputy. In other words, folks, the enemy is already here and getting help from the top. Joining me now is Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence and now a National Security Analyst for MSNBC, and Christian Clark, President of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. Frank, let me go to you first. They have recently downgraded domestic terrorism, and when you look at the attacks, 3 black churches in Louisiana, the 11 members of the Jewish community and Jewish faith killed in the synagogue. If that's not terrorism, what is? And any number of those statistics released show there's an increase in hate crime. How does this administration justify downgrading domestic terrorism in our intelligence department?
Well, I can tell you it's certainly not justifiable on any data set that we're aware of, so we have to look to other motivations on this downgrade. You're right, the FBI has noted a 17% increase in hate crime just in the 1 year between 2016 and 2017. So the administration's going in the opposite direction of the facts, and even more so, Rev, we've got to make a comparison here to radical extremist radicalization online and compare that to what the president is saying verbally, what he's messaging through his administration. And I see, having worked terrorism during my career, I see an analogy here between radical online radicalization in the Islamic movement and what we're seeing domestically and even globally. So the church burnings in Louisiana raise a question for all of us, which is, does the FBI have the tools and resources it needs for domestic terrorism? And I'm here to tell you, legislation does not yet equip the FBI appropriately. If you want to continue the comparison with international terrorist groups, we don't have an analogous domestic terrorism law that allows the FBI to say, you're advocating violence on a domestic level, and we need to treat you like a terrorist organization.
Christian, look at some numbers. We've seen a 30% rise in the number of hate groups since President Trump took office. That's from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And we've seen a 50% spike in the number of white nationalist groups in little over the last year. And in the 17 years since the 9/11 attack, domestic extremism has killed more Americans here at home than Islamic terror, by a factor of nearly 4 to 1. Yet we're seeing the downgrading of looking into these matters. You testified this week before the House Judiciary Committee. What was the crux of what you were trying to say and how you were dealing with a lot of this messaging online?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that Congress is bringing attention to and shining a light on the crisis that we face in the country right now. No doubt hate crimes are on the rise, and we are seeing white nationalist groups proliferating all across the country because they are most certainly emboldened by the words, the rhetoric, and actions that they're seeing from the very top, from this White House and from this administration. We have seen the president use racial expletives to refer to people from African and Caribbean countries. There's the Muslim ban, and there are policies that really take aim at black and brown people in a very intentional way. And what I sought to explain to Congress is that they need to step up. We do need more tools in our arsenal to fight back against the hate that we're up against today. We need Congress to put in place laws that can allow us to, for example, hold the tech sector accountable for the ways in which they feed into this crisis. A lot of these white supremacists are not getting together at the local coffee shop. They are getting together online. They are going to places like Facebook and other online platforms to organize hate rallies, to target minority communities, to recruit new members. And so it's really important that we think about how do we hold the tech sector accountable for the ways in which they're feeding into this crisis that we're up against?
Frank, what can government do and what should they do around making sure that the tech companies do not continue to be an avenue for this kind of hate that is turning into actual violence with an increase in the numbers of victims?
Yeah, it's time for Congress to not just cross their fingers and hope for the best out of Silicon Valley, because look, they've proven that they're unable to handle this without some adult supervision. They're driven by profit, and quite frankly, they're driven by their own algorithms. You and I on social media, we like the idea that they're suggesting people we should friend, or we might want to think about joining this group. Well, guess what? Those same algorithms apply for people who are involved in hate and hate speech. And we're finding on the international terrorism side that the algorithms actually introduce terrorists to like-minded terrorists. And so Congress needs to get everybody together and say the algorithms need to be tweaked so that there's a filter for hate, violence, and hate speech. And then Congress needs to ask law enforcement, do you have what you need to get the job done? Right now, the answer is no.
Now, Christian, I think Frank touched on what I wanted to ask you, because you're a lawyer and a very good one at that. We are not talking about free speech. We're talking about domestic terrorism. How do we distinguish the two and remain within the confines of the law, where people have the right to express themselves, but we've got to be able to deal with these tech companies where they not become the place where you park to organize actual violent attacks on people based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion?
You know, the First Amendment and free speech are principles that are a bedrock feature of our democracy, and that's not what we're talking about when we talk about bitter, brutal hate crimes that are on the rise. We're talking about inciting violence. We're talking about white nationalists who are out there abusing online platforms to target communities. We represented a woman at American University who was elected school president, and shortly after that, the Daily Stormer and its publisher, Mr. Anglin, instructed their followers to go out and target this woman relentlessly. They hung banana peels and nooses around campus, and they doxed her, publishing her personal information online, and most strikingly, they encouraged and told people to go out and harm her. That is not speech that is protected under the First Amendment, and this is the kind of conduct that's feeding into the crisis that we're up against. We need this Justice Department to start doing its part. It needs to put more resources into the fight against hate crimes. We need Congress to play a role here as well and think about the new laws that they can put on the books to beat back against this crisis. And most importantly, we need to stand up for the victims and the communities that are on the receiving end of this hate. Whether you're talking about the churches burning in Louisiana, the 9 people who were killed while worshiping in Charleston, those who were mowed down at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. These are crimes that strike us at the core in this country, and it's time that all Americans wake up and figure out what we can do to beat back this crisis.
Frank, let me ask you, I'm out of time, but I must ask, have you heard out of this president or this attorney general or the preceding attorney general under this president the kind of language and the kind of call to arms in this country to beat back this kind of bigotry that demonstrates itself in actual violence?
Quite the opposite. What I've heard is the kind of messaging that enables and facilitates and emboldens people who are inclined to hatred. And leadership has to start at the top. We're not seeing it yet, Rev.
All right. Thank you, Frank Figliuzzi and Christian Clark. Coming up, the Trump administration wants to end affirmative action. And now one Texas university is playing along. I'll explain next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.